I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Mid-Sussex District Plan 2021 to 2039, and the hearing sessions that are taking place today and over the next 2 or 3 weeks are part of that examination. I'll come again to housekeeping points, so if you can just appraise us of fire escape and the location of facilities.
So the fire alarm is a continuous two-tone siren.
Have you got your mic on?
Sorry,
Yeah.
the fire alarm is a continuous two-tone siren. There is, I'm told, a fire drill today at 11 o'clock. So if it happens at 11, then we can stay where we are. If it's not at 11, we need to take it seriously, in which case there are exits there and behind me. If there is anybody up in the gallery, which at the moment there is behind them, but not using the lifts, please. And the assembly point is in the car park just outside the oak doors through which most people came. In terms of public conveniences, the ladies is on the ground floor in the entrance foyer, and the gents is at the top of the stairs up there.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Let's now move on to introductions without any further ado. So, Mr. Brown.
Good morning, sir. I'm Paul Brown, King's Counsel for the District Council.
Morning, Andrew Marsh, Head of Planning Policy and Housing Enabling at Mid-Sussex District Council.
Good morning, Natalie Sharp, Senior Planning Policy Officer at Mid-Sussex District Council.
Morning, sir. Chloe Salisbury on behalf of Mid-Sussex District Council.
Michael Hurley, assisting CPRE.
And Michael Brown from CPRE as well.
Isabella Buono, barrister instructed by Thacum.
Chris Brake, Planning Director at Thacum Homes, not speaking.
All right. Let me congratulate you, Mr. Brown, on being the third Mr. Brown in these so far in these hearings.
I'm conscious you've been blessed with Browns. Unbelievable, unrelated.
All right. Have you been following the proceedings on the live streaming?
I was not able to do so on the first day of the hearings. I've picked up the thread from listening in yesterday, sir.
All right, that's helpful. I'll do an abbreviated opening because I know that you're very familiar with the procedures anyway, but I'll go through it anyway. So, Charlotte Glancy, the Programme Officer. It's important that we're looking at the same version of the plan. This is obviously the submitted plan which came in on the 8th of July 2024 and therefore is being examined under the September 2023 version of the framework. The hearings, as you will know, are only part of the examination process. Much of the work is being undertaken in writing. So the written material has given me a lot of information already, which explains why the hearing agenda doesn't include discussion on a number of the plan's policies, because I've been engaging in a written exchange with the council on those. By the time we reach the end of the hearing sessions, the council should be clear about what modifications are required, and there'll be then a dialogue about the detailed wording. Main modifications will be subject to consultation, so anything that comes out of these hearings and out of my work on and dialogue with council on in the written part of the examination, when those appear as main modifications, they will be subject to consultation, and I will consider all the responses. My report, which I will produce in due course, recommends main modifications that are required to make the plan sound, and the council will normally adopt them. If they don't, the plan won't be sound and can't be adopted. We've got two distinct sessions, which I think we ought to be able to deal with in the morning, but we'll see how we go. The first of those is on matter 3, which is homes to meet all the needs of the community, or the needs of all the community, I should say, and then business and industrial needs. These are quite focused sessions, Next week, we're doing the spatial strategy and site selection process, which I think, you're coming to that, aren't you? I think. No, you're not.
You do, because of...
I tell you why you have to use the speakers, because it's being streamed and people can't hear it if you don't, yeah.
Apologise. I'm not expecting to attend. I have put in some written submissions, which I know you will have read.
Yes. All right. So, just in respect of today's proceedings, you don't need to repeat your whole case. I've read the representations you've made, but let's focus down on the critical points. I'll give the council the opportunity of the last say on each of these matters. And as you know, I'll occasionally express views as we go through. We'll aim to have a coffee break at, well, it might be a it might be imposed on us to have a break at 11, I don't know. It depends. It might be a convenient moment, but we'll have a coffee break this morning at an appropriate point. And lunch will be about 1 o'clock. I doubt that we'll be still going in the afternoon, but we'll see. Are there any questions at this stage about the hearing, how the hearings are run? Okay. Then let's move on to matter three. No, before we do move on to matter 3, let me just reprise some of the things that came out of yesterday. You might have more, but I've got 4 sort of key bullet points really. One is you're visiting your site appraisal process, basically, revisiting, and that all has to be tested across a range of factors. And in due course, we'll be able to map out a programme or time, basically a timetable for that. We're not there yet, but I'm reliant on you to come back and tell me. You're going to look at, there was a little discussion about policy DPH2 yesterday, and you're going to look at that in relation to the emerging framework. Yes. You're going to look at the housing requirement. This is all in the context of looking at what the housing requirement should be, but you're going to look at how that works in the light of the first 2 years of the plan. If you're rebasing to the 2025 in terms of LHN, what that does for your housing requirement in the first 2 years of the plan, which begin in 2023. And as a part of all that as well, you're revisiting the issue of the steps requirement, but I think that's something that will fall out of all the other work that you're doing. Those are the key things that jumped out at me. Are there any other points that...
I think that there may be minor points that go into each of those, but as headline points, I think that reflects pretty well where we're at.
Yes.
And Salisbury's looking slightly puzzled at the end.
No, I agree.
And Miss Salisbury usually keeps a very good note of things to do, but...
So I think you also asked us to review the windfall allowance that we'd made and check that we were
That's right.
satisfied that it would be a consistent supply. And in respect of looking at policy DPH2, also consider that in the context of the headroom that the council considers it may wish to include within the plan.
Yes, because we had a discussion about, do you actually need headroom now? Because you've got, assuming that policy survives into a final version of the MPPF, does that obviate the need for maintaining a level of headroom to ensure the resilience of the plan? And it seemed to me that, there is a choice. I mean, there's never been government policy on, yes, you've got to have X amount of headroom. But this is very much down to how the council wants to approach it, because on the one hand, you might prefer to make the site allocations and have a degree of headroom above that, so that you're actually protecting, not only protecting your plan, but also you're on the front foot when it comes to ensuring, controlling where development goes.
Yes.
So there is that.
Yes.
But I would sort of urge that on you, but on the other hand, you can adopt the other approach, which is actually we don't have to have any headroom, and we rely on the revised policy DPH2.
Yes. We wouldn't be able to call it windfall in the sense that there isn't a documented past record of it happening. But in one sense, DPH2 will be a source, or could be a source of new windfall sites,
Yes.
in crude terms. I say you couldn't put it under a windfall heading because you haven't got the documented past record to demonstrate it, but.
And it only kicks in under certain circumstances as well. That's the other thing, isn't
Yes.
it? So
Yes.
it's not necessarily something you would rely on over the planned period to add to your windfalls.
No.
Yeah.
No, but yes, but that's why it's probably better looked at as a form of resilience rather than.
Yes. Yes. I'm not going to go any further on that. I think obviously you're fully on top of what needs to be done. And from my point of view, the critical thing is that you think quite deeply about how you want to bring that work forward and what inputs you require at what time, and then provide me with a.
Yeah, I think so. It comes down to a point that you've made on several occasions, which is the level of risk that the council is prepared to take. And in a sense, reliance on DPH2, there is an element of risk in that we are not selecting the sites, but DPH2, and indeed the new PPF policy on it, are not a blank check for any site anywhere as long as there is a shortfall in the supply. There are locational requirements that are there. And so I think the council does need to go away and think, well, if those sites came forward, they hadn't been selected through the development plan, but they are subject to the criteria in the plan. Are we prepared to run with that? Or would we prefer the level of control, which means we've actually selected the sites in advance? And we'll take that away and think about it.
Yes, and I don't know whether that particular policy, in the way it's written in the MPPF, will survive in that form.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's something just to bear in mind at the moment, and then see what comes out of the wash.
Good. Well, that's very helpful, sir, and we will think on that.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Right, now I think we should move on to matter 3, and I'm going to go straight in with affordable housing, which is, you made a significant submission on that subject. What I'm going to do is just to make sure that I've got the gist of your case. So you don't need to go through the whole thing, but it may well be that there are things that I've not picked up properly. So this is what I think you're saying, all right. So first of all, you're saying you're stressing in particular rural affordable housing, the difficulty of finding affordable housing in the rural areas. This is substantially a rural district. The levels of income relating to the ratio of income to house prices is such that there is an affordability issue in the rural areas. You think that new developments should contain well over 30% of affordable housing. The plan aims for 30%. You say that the council hasn't explained why affordable housing has dropped from 2021 to 2024, because you say the housing register has actually grown. The number on the housing register has grown. So you think rural affordable housing is a big issue, and there's a build-up in the backlog on the affordable housing register. So you think that that's evidence that the 30%, which has been in existence since the submitted plan, the adopted plan, of course, you think that is evidence that that 30% policy is failing because the backlog is growing. And you think a higher percentage should be delivered, and also that that backlog shouldn't be amortised over 19 years. So you've identified a need for 7,277 affordable homes over the plan period. That would equate to a 44% affordable home allowance, I think you're saying, for greenfield allocations and windfalls. You're not applying that to brownfield sites. You also say that at 40%, you've done some viability work, based on Crabbit Park, which you think is the least viable of the, or I shouldn't say least viable, but the one with perhaps a lower level of viability than the other sites. And you said the 40% would still be viable on that site. In fact, you say the viability threshold on that site is 60%, using regression analysis. So what you're finally saying really is the council has actually made a policy choice to maximise housing delivery by allowing a lower level of affordable housing, which, using your words, generates excess profit instead of seeking a greater proportion of affordable housing. And I think you made a comparison with other authorities, didn't you, as well, so that you looked at Horsham and so on. So what I'm going to do now is go to the council, and you can explain where you're coming from on this, and then I'll give you the opportunity of, is there something I've missed in your?
Yes, could I just make a
Yes.
comment on this?
Yes.
First of all, on the question of rural housing versus urban affordable housing, we're saying that actually there's no data that is available to us or to you as to whether there is a differential need within mid-Sussex. I am doing no more than extrapolating from national figures, but none of us know whether there is a more significant problem in mid-Sussex in rural areas than there is in urban areas. One suspects there is, given the national trends, but I don't actually know that for sure. I would also say, just on a different point, that in our note we are, excuse me, slightly guilty of double counting in our numbers, in working out the percentage of affordable housing that the plan proposes to make. We based the numbers on the total housing that was going to be built of the average of 108.8 per annum. In fact, that includes a number of houses to provide for the need of Crawley. And of course, I would be double counting if I included that number in the overall percentage, because it would be meeting Crawley's needs and therefore not meeting mid-Sussex's needs. And I make that point because I am conscious that on Monday you were pressing the council to consider increasing the number of houses made available to meet the needs of Crawley and potentially of Brighton as well. The more houses we put in specifically to meet the needs of other districts does nothing to alleviate the shortfall in the delivery of need for mid-Sussex residences. And that's not a point that's made in our note. The rest, I think, is basically a matter of the need for further evidence as to where the right balance lies between the provision of houses, because clearly the plan is not going to meet the full need of the district's people who can't find homes in the market conditions, and where the right balance lies between incentivising the developers and boosting the delivery of affordable housing that doesn't seem to have been tested by the district at levels other than 30%. And the work we have done using data from the SHMA and elsewhere suggests that viability is possible, at least on greenfield sites at considerably higher levels, but it's not for us to say what that final level should be. That's a matter for the council with your guidance, I think.
Yes, I mean, I've dealt with plans elsewhere where districts have taken, have provided for unmet need from adjoining cities where they've sought 50% affordable housing. adjacent to the city boundary, because of levels of unmet need that have been identified there. So I think we can put that to the council. First of all, I want the council to explain why they've taken the approach that they have done in this plan, and whether they've reviewed, because the plan has been, this is reviewed, whether the plan, in reviewing what they did under the adopted plan, they've come back to the same number, 30%, so we can explore that. So let's look at that. I'll give the council the opportunity of responding.
Thank you. So it might be helpful. I mean, you broke down the points that CPRE were making very helpfully in your introduction. It might be useful if we sort of do those one at a time. It seems to be logically the starting point is the question of the level of need that there is. And I mean, on that, you've seen from our topic paper in section 5, certainly paragraphs 422 to 427, set out the schma which underpinned the original district plan and then the update that has been done more recently. And that gets us to the conclusion at paragraph 426, which is that the point on which CPRE focus, where the schma update concludes a need for 383 homes per annum, which is a decrease driven, the schma update concludes by the high increase in local incomes. And
Are you,
I think,
which paper you're on?
I'm on, sorry, I should have said, I'm on, at least I hope I'm on MSTP2.
TP2, yes.
I should have given you the number, MSTP2, and that's paragraph 422 through to 4.26. And that just summarises the background documents. I think part of the point being made here by CPRE is, well, you're predicting or working on a decrease, but in fact, if you look at your housing register, numbers are going up, and there are 2 points there. One of them is that the schma is going in the wrong direction, but secondly, I think it feeds into the point that you made that CPRE is suggesting that is demonstrating that the 30% in the past has actually been failing to keep pace with the need that's there. So if we could just focus on that, Mr. Marshall, you can tell me who's going to deal with it in the team, but simply on the question of need at the moment, and then we'll move on to the more refined bits.
Thank you. So as Mr. Brown says, the schma sets out the figures there. Iceni, who we've used for the 2 previous, are also doing, and have done similar approaches across the whole of the county. So it's the methodology that they use is consistent, particularly with Horsham and Crawley. There was a joint schma originally, and then subsequent updates to it. In terms of the need numbers, as Mr. Brown said, it has fallen. Mr. Brown's point about the relationship to it and the housing register, they are looking at 2 slightly different things. You've got the register being a snapshot in time currently, and you've got the need looking forward based on future projections and standard method. In order to identify the exact reason between what Mr. Brown is saying is something we would need to refer back to Iceni on and understand exactly the mechanism and the relationship between the 2. So we don't have an answer for that today, but it's something we can certainly come back to. In terms of just going back on the plan that we've got now with a policy of 30%, I think important to say at the outset that that policy is one that we are achieving. So looking across the county, I think I'm right in saying up until at least the last year, we haven't got the figures from everybody for this year, but we've got the highest affordable housing delivery in the county. We've got a policy of 30%, which we are securing 30, I think the figure's just over 30% from all of those sites which are compliant. So in other words, they are over the threshold, the 9 dwelling threshold. So those sites that are to be policy compliant would need to provide affordable housing at 30%. We are achieving 30%.
And just on that, Mr. Marsh, do you know how any of your adjoining authorities with higher figures are doing? Are they achieving their policy targets, or do you not know?
I don't know that at this moment in time, but obviously there is a risk that those that have got higher 35, I think we've seen, and 40 elsewhere, there is a chance that for viability or other reasons, they're not achieving that. All I can say at the moment is that we are achieving the 30%. And in the paper, it's in the topic paper 2, under 4.28, table 21, it sets out the delivery of affordable housing, so that's not what we've secured in each year, but again, you'll see from the figures there at the bottom, and again, it's crude because it's the total provision rather than everything that's compliant, but based on what we've got in our commitments list, the reliance on the big sites in the existing DPD and the district plan, we are achieving 30% in our delivery. The total affordable housing being provided is, in most of those years, over 30%, recognising there will be peaks and troughs and a lag.
Okay,
That's delivery.
Go on, sorry.
Just to interrupt you on that. So I'm looking at table 21. Total housing, that's total completions, is it, during?
That's, yeah, it's total completions of affordable housing and total housing completions.
Yeah.
Obviously, and we note in there that there will be some sites that will not be policy compliant in that they are under 9 dwellings.
Yes.
Does that total include those 9 dwelling units?
It does.
So the total housing is all housing, both the ones
Yeah.
from which you can seek a contribution and those from which you can't?
We can't.
So what that says is, despite your policy of 30%, apart from year 2023-24, you've actually somehow delivered more than 30%. And the ratio of affordable housing completions to total housing.
That's
How's
correct.
that happened? How does that happen?
Again, I think what we have to take into account here is that there is obviously a lag in the data between what's been secured and what's been delivered. But those are the figures that we've got in the AMR.
I don't know the answer to this, Mr. Marsh, and you may not either, but it strikes me it might, in some cases it would provide the answer. Are there any 100% affordable housing schemes that are coming forward in those statistics? Are there, for example, housing association schemes?
Yeah, there are. I think it's Breeks Farm at Brookley. I can't remember the total number of dwellings on that site. It was a couple of hundred, wasn't it, I think?
Yes, and we have had sites that have delivered sort of what we call additionality, so going above the 30%, again at Burgess Hill.
And how is, well, first of all, let's just start with 100% schemes, which are presumably brought forward by registered providers or similar organisations. So there are some of those. Is Freaks Farm that kind of, what was Freaks Farm?
Yeah.
Was that a 100%
It is
scheme?
100%
Right, that's 100% scheme, right. And then sites which have got market housing, but there is additionality. How is that additionality being provided? Is that being funded by the developer, or is there external funding that is going in to provide the uplift?
Yeah, it's a mix. So some of them are entirely, and some of them are based on funding.
And sort of funding sources you're talking about would include what?
I haven't got that with me.
All right, okay, no. Well, yes, yeah, but I'm just trying to sort of get to the inspector's question, because you can see where the inspector is going. Potentially, if sites are delivering, if you're managing 37%, doesn't that suggest that higher than 30% is viable? I mean, that will be, unless there is another explanation for how you get the extra 7, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
This aggregates all of the sources, so obviously you can't get down to that. That's the point there. So a little bit more work on this, and going back on the Arseni report as well, which we talked about earlier, would be useful. And give you an opportunity of commenting on what the council have just said, Mr. Brown.
I'm the first to say that the parties opposite are much more expert on the numbers than we pretend to be. The extent to which there is a shortfall, if there is one at the moment, is perhaps all as well. We think there is a shortfall. I think I want to focus our comments really on the numbers going forward. rather than the past performance. We think there is a backlog. I accept that the waiting list numbers is a different way of looking at the housing need, and we've had to rely on that data from government sources because we weren't able to get the information elsewhere. But that showed an increase in the waiting list of mid-Sussex from memory, something like 1,800 in 2021 up to 2,000 something 400, I think it was, in last year. And that was an indication for us. It may be a moment in time number, but it shows a trend of upward need. And if that trend is correct and applicable in mid-Sussex, it's something that we need to bear in mind as we look forward at the number of houses that are going to be delivered going forward. And the need going forward has been identified in the Schmar update. We actually think that need is slightly lower than the number that Mid-Sussex has suggested, because one looks at paragraph, if we look at the Schmar update, at paragraph table, wait a minute, let me find it. At table 3.4, the net need for homes for rent is a net number of 383, which is the number that is quoted by Mid-Sussex themselves. But when they look at homes for co-ownership, they take a gross number, not a net number. So you're adding net numbers, and we think net numbers is the correct way to do it, for rental properties against a gross number for co-ownership homes. We think the correct number for co-ownership numbers is their net need of 311, and that the actual net need for housing going forward is an annual need across the board of 694, not the 700 and something or other number quoted by Mid-Sussex themselves. And the question therefore arises is what percentage of that need is going to be met by offering 30% affordable homes out of the total delivery under the plan of an average of 1,088 per annum. And the number comes down to something like 43%. So that's the area that we focused our attention.
Yes. Does that, we sort of scooted over the top of that particular issue when we were talking about the housing requirement, of course. So let's play it back in now. Does the level of affordable housing need justify a change either to the percentage of affordable or to the overall housing requirement?
It might depend on what the requirement is, sir, and
Yes.
certainly if you were to look at the sort of housing requirement that you have been suggesting we should be working towards, and you apply 30% to that over and above what the plan was originally proposing, then they're assuming that we carry on doing what we've done up until now, which is meeting the 30% on those sites where it's applicable, then there will be a significantly increased number of affordable homes provided. I don't know, Mr. Marsh, whether you can comment on whether that increase would address the concern that Mr. Brown has raised or not.
The only thing I would say is in the Schmar itself, it recognises that it's not the relationship between, it recommends that in order to meet the number, the mechanism of just simply uplifting your total supply is not ideal. There are lots of other factors at play. It will play a part, because obviously the more that we are providing, the 30% more allocations, we will get more. But to address the need itself, the Schmar recommends not doing that, because there are too many factors in play outside of the plan process even, that would affect that. Can I just confirm, just going back to table 21, if that's helpful? Just
Yes.
two things. In terms of the 100%, been reminded by colleagues that Brooklyn in particular benefited from Homes England funding, and other developers have also taken advantage of this. And so that's one reason. Secondly, again, just to clarify in table 21 and the percentages above 30%, that obviously the lag would also involve sites that might be a site, let's say, for argument of maths, a site of 100, 30% affordable housing, they're providing 30, and they start building the affordables first. And that we've had anecdotally and discussions in our developer liaison group that at times of either the slow market or particularly as a result just post-COVID, it was the affordables that they were able to deliver quickly and get off the ground quickly and move on quickly. So that might explain some of that some of the delivery on a big site, the affordables have come in first. That sort of addresses the short-term supply and backlog in some respects.
Yes, you can't really rely on that time series particularly, can you? No.
No, and certainly so that might explain why there is, for example, a significant drop from 35 to 23% over a single year, because if it is about completions rather than the overall proportions of the permissions that are being granted, I think probably the more meaningful statistic would be to take the whole of that and then average those out, and that would give you a better sense.
Yes.
And there you would still be necessarily over 30%, but probably not as much over 30% as the 37% suggests it might be. Right. But so we can take that away and produce a more detailed note if you would find that helpful.
Yes,
just to
please.
explain
Yes.
where some of those higher figures have come from.
Yes.
But I mean, because I can understand the general point, which is on the face of it, that's suggesting that more than 30% is viable. But and so we need to get to the bottom of whether that is the case, and so that probably leads. I don't know if you want to deal with it now, but to sort of the second part of the equation, because of course affordable housing is also the art of what is possible, and part of what's being said, for example, in relation to Cravat Park, is well, CPRE have looked at it and they think that higher viability figures are possible, and I know there has been viability assessment work carried out by the council. One of the criticisms that's been made is that we haven't tested above 30%, and I'd look to Mr. Marsh to explain firstly whether that's right, and if it is right, why we haven't gone above 30%. What did the 30% testing show?
So yeah, the original SHMAR conclusion tells us that there's a clear need for affordable housing. The evidence suggests that affordable housing delivery should be maximised, but it does mention the fact that it's a starting point and we have to look at the amount that can be viably provided. So the viability testing that was carried out in a couple of phases. The first viability assessment, which is, just for your notes, IV2, that's 2022, viability study was then updated just to reflect the passage of time. In those notes, and the original study, our viability consultant tested 30% affordable housing alongside all of the other developer contributions, and etc., and concluded at the end of that the range of sites that we had in the plan was viable at 30%. What the conversations with the viability consultant at that time were that the sites that we had in the plan and the infrastructure requirements that we were setting, both in terms of for developer contributions, but also the other policies in our plan that would have a necessary cost on the development of that site. So things like the sustainability requirements, biodiversity net gain, etc. At that time, and subsequently confirmed in the following note, was that there was assuming that the amount per dwelling for developer contributions is still viable at around about £30,000 per dwelling, plus 30% affordable housing. And we noted that some of our sites were getting very close to that. And the reason for that, particularly at Crabbit Park, west of Burgess Hill, and at Sayers Common, all of the sites at Sayers Common, is that the infrastructure requirements there for the sustainable communities in terms of providing sustainable transport, on-site education, primary, secondary school, community buildings, etc., down the list, are getting close to the £30,000 per dwelling that was tested, the sensitivity test in the viability work. So the viability consultant at that time said, well, we could test 40%, but it won't be viable. Because you're so close to the 30,000 that you will either have 40% affordable housing or you won't be able to mitigate the impact of the development with the infrastructure required.
Right. So in other words, so I think in simple terms, it's correct that we haven't tested above 30%, but that's because 30% was demonstrating we were already knocking on the door or pushing the limit of what was viable.
Have you got a reference for, I'll come to you in a moment, have you got a reference for that particular piece of evidence? So the viability, you tested that, or your consultants tested that, the amount per dwelling, if you're ring fencing 30k per dwelling for infrastructure and all the stuff that needs to go into sustainable communities and other sites, contributions, and you have 30% affordable housing, that was getting close to a sort of threshold for viability. Where is that? Where can I read that? If you don't know now, don't worry. Provide that, yes, if you do that through the programme officer. But it's obviously we need the reference as well for the CPRE.
Indeed.
Mr. Hurley.
Yes, thank you. I've got a number of questions, but I just focus in on this last point. If we look at the updated viability note and look at table 6.1a, so if you look at the first line across there, which is Crabbit Park, and these numbers, as I understand, they include all of the mitigation costs and increase in the contribution to 25,000 per unit. You look at the right-hand side of that, those are all positive numbers to the order of, and can you remind us, please, what the percentages are that have been tested in that sensitivity?
In table 6.1a,
Yes.
I personally can't.
Okay,
We can find out.
But the point is that the residual land value for all of those are significantly higher than the benchmark land value, and that's at 30% affordable housing. And that suggests that there are still significant amounts of, you can call it a surplus, which is the difference between the residual land value and the benchmark land value. And it's that surplus which we have looked at independently and said, actually, that for Crabbit Park, that surplus will enable you to build far significantly higher proportions of affordable housing. So the data here don't quite square with what you were saying in terms of Crabbit Park being very marginal.
Well,
At
this is why I've asked the council to reference back
Yes,
the
exactly.
points that they've made. Yeah. Can I just pick up another point that kind of spins off really from something that CPRE was saying, which is if you're dealing with affordable housing need from, let's say, Crawley, which has an evidenced very high level of affordable housing need, should that influence the level of affordable housing requirement on sites near that urban area?
I think we would agree that in theory, yes, but in principle, we would need to test that through the viability work. And I think what we're talking about here is that missing piece of the puzzle as CPRE have identified, which is a very specific test at Crabbit Park at 40% with the infrastructure requirements that we're asking for. And that's something we could certainly go and have a look at.
I think this does need a little bit more testing. In particular, I'm interested in the sites near Crawley, because obviously we've had evidence that there's a very significant level of unmet need. I know that an affordable unmet need, and I know that, as I said, I've dealt with other local plans where the sort of what you might call the recipient authority has actually sought really quite a high level of affordable housing need on sites in their area next to the large urban areas. That, of course, is all very well, but it has to remain viable. It can't, there's no point in putting these figures in if they're just sort of showcasing, really. You know what I mean? They've actually got to work.
It has to remain viable, and it also needs to be done in a way which doesn't distort, bearing in mind, this point you've made, Sir, Crabbit Park ideally located for Crawley's needs, but it would also meet part of Mid-Sussex's needs. The developer at Crawley is going to be in competition with the developers in the rest of Mid-Sussex.
Yes.
And if you saddle them with an extra 10%, then, I mean, they're not in the room today, but one could well imagine that they would bleat. Now, the fact they bleat doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, but it does mean that we need to be careful that we're not imposing a disproportionate burden on them as compared with other people. And I just put that marker down without saying you wouldn't do it, but it is something that needs to be borne in mind.
All right, now I'm just going to one more round on this. So, Mr. Hurley.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we use Crabbit Park as an example as the most marginal site. If Crabbit Park is viable, then so will all of the other sites be viable. So that 40% or 50%, it's very easy to test it. You've tested at 30, 20, 10. You just put it in your model. Well.
All right. Look,
Sorry.
I'll tell you what. Look, I'm going to stop this because I've got the gist of what you're saying. I've got the gist of what the council's saying. There is some more explanation that's required, and I'm going to put that to the council. I think you do need to substantiate the verbal evidence you've given today. You need to explain where that's come from, but also address that issue of the high level. I think Crawley's representations are likely, I think they have referred to a high level of affordable housing need, haven't they?
They have.
Yes. So that really needs to be addressed in your responses. So I'll leave that with you. And you're quite right, of course, the developers of those sites are not here either. Otherwise, they would have had something to say as well. But it's something that you need to substantiate.
We will take that away, sir. And I mean, necessarily, I think it might mean going back to Iceni and asking possibly for them to do some additional work. But I'm sorry, we can't answer that today. But
All right.
that's why we have Iceni, because they're the experts in crunching the numbers. But we're happy to do that.
All right, so I'm going to add that to the list of things then. Yeah. So I want to move on now. Is there really something that you need to say?
Can I just make one very quick point? I would like just to save Mr. Brown from joining me in the trap of double counting. He made the comment that the more houses we build, the more affordable houses we will build. That is not helpful to Mid-Sussex to the extent that you are building more houses to deal with the needs of Crawley or elsewhere, because you're meeting their need for affordable housing, not ours. You can't credit the houses to both districts.
Well, you might not have heard what I was talking about on day one, which is that you can't kind of ring fence these things and say, well, look, Crawley's got unmet need, but if we don't provide it, then it stays in Crawley, because it doesn't. It still comes into Mid-Sussex, and so does, so do people from the coastal West Sussex area as well. So that actually then has, an effect on what is available for people in Mid-Sussex and the Mid-Sussex housing market. So it's all interlinked, and I think there's a risk in saying if you build more there, it's only going to help them, because actually it has a bearing on what's available for people who are living here already and the households that are being formed here.
I promise I understand that, sir. But you can't have both districts knocking off the affordable houses against their own targets and taking credit for it for the same house. That is all I'm saying.
It's a tricky subject. I totally agree. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, and I'll leave that with you.
Thanks, sir.
All right. And that should be, I should say to you, that should be a without prejudice investigation. In other words, I'm not expecting necessarily to come back and justify your 30% without being very clear on why it should stay that or stay at that point. If there's evidence that it should go up in certain places, I need to see that. All right. We've got 8 minutes.
Reliably informed.
Thank you.
That the fire alarm has been cancelled
Oh,
due to us.
to us.
Yes.
Oh dear. All right. The next thing I've got down here is housing mix. I don't think there's anybody here. No, you weren't proposing to. It was, I think, I put this in because there was a comment from Sayers Common and Hurstpere Point about housing mix, and I think they had a view.
They wanted they thought that we were providing too many 4/5 and not enough 2/3.
Yes, but it was the difference wasn't substantial between what the council are proposing and the modification that I've suggested to the policy, which I think you've drafted now, deals with that anyway.
So that, in essence, sir, is what we would have said had they been here.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's move on from that one then. Self-build and are you dealing with self-build and custom? Yes. Would you like to lead off on that?
Thank you, sir. So our concern relates to part 3 of this policy, DPH 6, which requires a minimum of 2% of all units on schemes of 100 or more dwellings. And our concern relates to whether or not there's an adequate evidence-based justification for that 2%, noting that the framework, I think paragraph 63 of the right version, requires policies of this kind to reflect established need. The council's told us in MSTP2 that there are only 16 applicants on the self-build register. That's down from 24 in the previous base period, which means that if all of the relevant sites were to come forward in accordance with this policy, there'd be 8 times the identified demand on the register being delivered. And that's an update from what's in our hearing statement, because we were looking at the old base period before the council helpfully provided the updated figures on the register. So that's our concern in a nutshell.
Yeah, and you also made the point that the policy is across the board and therefore affects things like Burgess Hill site where self-build might not be a feasible option anyway.
Yes.
So there's those two things. Yes, is your policy requirement excessive in this regard?
So the original, the 2% requirement in DPH6 was based on the number of people on the self-build register at that time and how we could satisfy the number on the base period at that time. So, as you know, the self-build register is a snapshot in time. It tells us how many people are interested in that type of product at that moment. The register is reviewed annually. We have an annual review whereby the register can be, the numbers on the register can reduce, bearing in mind some people can be on more than one register in different authorities, or simply that they decide that self-build is not for them or it's not no longer affordable. So we have seen a reduction in that over time. All we would say on this, I think, is that we could look to revise what that percentage was, but obviously that could end up storing up a problem in the future should the self-build register increase. But we have got established in the policy and when secured by 106, a cascade clause which says that you identify the self-build at the beginning. If after a certain period of time that demand is not there or they are not taken up, then it will go back to being a non-self-build property. We have seen instances where that's been successful and that's happened. So there's an inbuilt flexibility in it. I think from our perspective, we could change the percentage, we could lower the percentage or remove the percentage, but it could store up a problem in the future in terms of meeting the need for self-build should the register increase. So we think the sensible thing to do is to keep it where it is, secure it, and if the demand or need isn't there at that moment in time, then that dwelling would revert back to a non-self-build.
And you've already agreed a modification which makes it easier for self-build and custom plots to be brought back into the open market as opposed to going through the affordable process, which is what you had originally. Yeah.
Correct.
And so I think
look at Ms. Bowen.
Thank you.
Yes.
Could I just come back on, I think there were two distinct points there. The first, helpful clarification where the 2% came from and potential for that percentage to be revised. Obviously, there's not much to go down from 2%. And I think probably part of what the problem is on the strategic allocations that 2% of a very large scheme, 1% of a very large scheme is still going to be a high number, and that might be a reason why a percentage-based approach doesn't work when the register's at the level that it is. That was point one on what the requirement should be. On the cascade mechanism, our concern on that is that it slows down delivery, particularly in the early years, because if we're looking at the register as the best indication of demand and the demand's not there, then we're sort of waiting for the market to tell you what we already know, which is that demand's low.
What alternative would you suggest?
I wonder whether instead of part 3 having a percentage, you could have a policy requirement for an appropriate contribution to be made towards identified need. And there's an element of future-proofing there in terms of it might increase over the plan period. And if it becomes very high and the council can evidence it at that time, then you might be expecting more than 2% on some sites.
So I'm just trying to think how that would work. So rather than specify a fixed percentage, you put in a clause which says you'll provide affordable housing, you provide custom and self-built housing on a particular site in accordance with what? In accordance with the evidenced need that exists at that time. But I'm not sure how you'd then, because you'd have a number of sites coming forward at different points, wouldn't you? And how would that work you know, in practical terms, I suppose.
That it's recognising the point I began with, that the percentage approach is difficult when you've got very large sites. You can see why the council would want something in there, given that there's some demand and they've got their statutory duty.
So if you have a sustainable communities site of, let's say, 2,000, that is quite a chunk, isn't it, of units, which there might not be demand for. And what you're saying is then you're sitting waiting for people to come along. I'm not sure how that would work. And then after a while it reverts.
Yes. So on the 3 strategic allocations, each one of them would deliver more than what current demand is, as shown through the register. So therefore, on the evidence that we have as of today, the effect of including the 2% requirement is to slow delivery, because they have to wait for the cascade mechanism to work its way through. And therefore, I appreciate the question then is, well, what do we replace it with?
Yes,
1% is still going, you can only go down to 1.
So I can see the point you're making. I'm interested to know whether there's a viable alternative approach. I'm not necessarily saying you're right, but I'm looking at what else could you do, you know, because there is an obligation on the council to provide for customers.
And so I think you've really hit the nail on the head. It's national policy that provision is made for this. We've seen considerable variation. I don't think Mr. Marsh gave you the figure, but my understanding is that at the time the policy was set, there were something like 140 odd people on the list. We're now down to 16. I don't know, we don't know what the reason for that change is, but it has been as high as 140. And of course, the 16 that are on, there may be 16 on it next year, but it may be a different 16 people. It is a snapshot in time, and that doesn't mean that there will be 16 throughout the whole of the plan period. And I think that's really the point that Mr. Marsh makes about, in those circumstances, better to aim on what appears to be the high side and make sure that you could satisfy national policy, as long as there is an adequate cascade that allows you to get out of it if it proves inappropriate. I think the council would be open to looking at alternatives, as long as this enables us to satisfy national policy in relation to the provision of it. We are where we are because it's the mechanism that we think we've tweaked it once in response to your comments. Very happy to tweak it again, but we're not quite sure how.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually ask you to get together and see if you can draft something which works, you know, and which the council are happy with as well, because they've got to administer it, and they've got a legal obligation to make sure that those sites do come forward. So, you know, if you can find something that works.
All right. And if we can't, sir, then you've got the representations on the two sides, and
yeah.
Right, but you know, we're very happy to have that discussion outside this room, and if we can come up with something sensible, then we'll bring it back to you. Otherwise, you're going to have to make a decision.
It might be that one point to take up outside the room is the length of the marketing period in the cascade, and it might be that a shorter period satisfies the council, but doesn't have the delivery difficulties that we're identifying.
All right, no, that's very helpful. So I can park that, and you can come back and
leave that with us.
If you agree it, that's fine. If you don't, then I've got the two approaches to think about. All right. That I think is that. Thank you very much. Well, I'll plough on actually, because now that we haven't got a fire alarm. Right, we've done mix, we've done customer self-build. Older people, you're not making a comment on that, are you? No. And I've read the council's explanation on that in your topic paper, so I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
Accessibility policy I do have. Are you dealing with accessibility policy? All right, so my understanding from what you're saying, that first of all, I read DPH 12. You want Right, no, I tell you what, rather than try and paraphrase what you said, I'm going to ask you to do it. Might be easier.
So our accessibility policy is looking at delivering category 2 and category 3 dwellings, and at category 2 we're proposing that the policy would require all new residential dwellings would be expected to be category 2, and then there are some exceptions listed underneath that. And then with category 3, we've split that between market and affordable, the percentage that would be required. And these are recommendations that have come out of the SHMA reports, both the 2021 and 2024 SHMAs recommended that given the growth in the population, particularly for older people, people over 65, and within that with mobility pressures, that's a way to future-proof the housing, the new housing, would be to require all new residential dwellings as M42.
Right, now let me see if I can understand this, because the building regs categories are a little bit confusing, aren't they? So M42, you want all houses to be at minimum M42 to standard, right?
Yes.
You've then got 5% of homes, I think it is, market wheelchair adaptable, is that right?
Yes.
That's M4, that's one of the M43 categories.
M43 to A.
Yes. And then, because of what the guidance says, the wheelchair accessible houses, they have to be the affordable ones, and you're seeking 4% of those. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Gosh, I got that right. It's the problem really is the kind of distinction between the two categories within M43, isn't it? Where some are wheelchair adaptable and some are wheelchair accessible.
Yes, so ready.
Yeah. Right, and we have MPPF H05B, page 33, because it doesn't seem to have any references, which says at least 40% to be M42. Not sure what it says about M43. What's your view? What's your point on this?
Our point is the one you're getting at there, which is that after the SHMA has come the draft framework, which has that 40% requirement in H05B. That should be read alongside the consultation document which accompanied the draft framework, which tells us two things. Firstly, perhaps an obvious one, that the government's not mandating all new homes to be to an M42 standard. And secondly, alongside that, that it's affording flexibility in order to ensure that house building is maximised overall. And that's acknowledging the point we're making, that sort of going above and beyond isn't without knock-on consequences, particularly because additional land and internal space is required to comply with this standard. So if the council were to impose this type of requirement, we have concerns that it knocks on for the number, type, size of dwellings delivered, the densities at which sites can be delivered, and that's contrary to general push in policy to be driving up delivery, including through increasing densities.
So there seems to have been, at least taking the draft policy, seems to be a change in circumstances since you drafted the submitted plans policy. And in the light of what we've got now, whilst recognising it's still draft, what view would you now take? Do you want to go away and think about it?
Potentially, yes, but we obviously have the SHMA evidence still there showing that there is going to be an increase
Yeah.
in those with mobility issues in the future. Obviously, the 40% is increased on what our adopted policy is, so we would still be making an additional contribution to that potential future need.
It doesn't
It
say,
does say,
it's
it says
not a
at
cap
least,
40%,
it says
it's
at least
Yes.
40%.
Yeah.
So you can go above it, but you hit the top end, which says don't mandate everything.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm going to leave that with, again, I'm very happy for you to get together and suggest something on that works. All right. That's it. I'll make a note of that as well, so. Good. I've read your submissions on gypsies and travellers. I don't actually have any queries on that. So that would take us through the whole of my matter 3. Yes.
Wishful thinking.
Yes, it is wishful thinking. Yes, is there anything else that you want to raise? No? Anything that you want to raise at this stage?
No, so I just had a query actually, just going back to your introduction and the items that you had for us. And one of the things you've asked us to do is produce a timetable for the further work that we're going to do. I think it was on Tuesday, so you said that we should expect further questions from you on some of the smaller scale allocations. I was just wondering if you could update on likely timescales for us receiving that and when you might want a response, just so we can factor that into our programming.
Yes, I was going to use the gap week to finalise those and get those to you. So you've got those at the same time as you're dealing with the larger sites. But they're not going, I wouldn't panic, because they're not going to be questions that are going to get you scuttling, you know, to dig out all your evidence base. And they're going to be fairly simple questions, probably about access and infrastructure, which you will be able to have answers to, I'm sure. But I want to just have a look at some of those sites. I've been around them all, so there are points that some representatives have made that I'd like clarified. So yes, there will be a list of questions. There won't be a long list.
That's really helpful, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? So we can adjourn now. I suggest we adjourn now and resume at 11:30 when we get Mr. Brown.
I was going to say, my understanding was you told people, was it 11:45?
I was 11:45. Right, we can have a longer break.
I'm
then, so.
very happy to come back at 11:30, but it might be an empty room on the other side, so
All right, we're going to take a half an hour's break then. We'll come back at 11:45.
I'm grateful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, and welcome to Matter 4 of these hearings. My name is Jonathan Bohr. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Mid-Sussex District Plan 2021 to 2039. The hearing sessions are part of that examination, but a very substantial part of it is undertaken in writing, as you will know. Because we've got new people here, do we want to do housekeeping points again?
Certainly, sir. If the fire alarm goes off, it's the real thing. That's the exit. The assembly point is in the car park outside the door that you came in, and the gents' loos are out the door and up the stairs on the landing.
And the Programme Officer, Charlotte Blancy here. Blancy, sorry. Let's go around the table. So, starting with the council.
Good morning, sir. Paul Brown, King's Counsel for Mid-Sussex.
Morning, Andrew Marsh, Head of Planning Policy and Housing Enabling here at Mid-Sussex.
Morning, Catherine Banks, Senior Planning Policy Officer at Mid-Sussex.
Morning, Chloe Salisbury on behalf of Mid-Sussex District Council.
Good morning, Anthony Pollard, Senior Director and Head of Economics at Turley, appearing on behalf of Indurant Limited, formerly St Modwins, and I'm here essentially representing the economic evidence that's been submitted through various consultation responses.
Good morning, Nick Edwards, Planner at Turley. I've been advising Indurant, formerly St Modwin Developments, on their site at Copthorne since the Regulation 18 stage in 2022.
Thank you. I'll just say a little bit about emission sites, because yours is actually an emission site, isn't it? So I've been really quite strict with the other representatives on the housing side of things. If they've got emission sites, I don't, because I'm examining the plan as submitted, not their sites. The same applies to you. I know where your site is, obviously, but we're going to try to be not specific to its merits. Do you get my point? Yeah. All right. So I don't really need, I think, to go any further with introductions. We'll aim to finish about lunchtime. I just think that that would be entirely possible. Obviously, there will be a list of main modifications. They will grow as the hearings go through. They become they're eventually put in a schedule, they're consulted on, and I'll write a report with recommended modifications. They're required to make the plans sound. The council would normally adopt them. Obviously, if they don't adopt them, the plan's not sound. This matter is to do with business and industrial needs. I'm not calling this employment. I know everybody calls it employment provision, but I think the world's moved on a bit. I'm calling it business and industrial. And I know that you've got a site. I know where it is. But I think what you're doing is basically querying or criticising the council's approach to the need for business and industrial land, basically, and the quantum of that, and in particular the logistics element of that. Well, what I'm going to do is ask the council just briefly to go through how they've calculated those needs. I think you've probably, correct me if I'm wrong, one of those elements was strategic distribution and strategic distribution. I think in your answer, you've taken that to mean the spatial distribution, but in fact it's not, of course. I'm talking about logistics. So you're onto that now, yeah? Yeah, okay, good. All right. Do you want to just very briefly go through where you've got to with the employment land calculation? Because you're not actually, you're saying basically there's no need to allocate further employment land, but that there are elements of employment in some of the strategic sites.
That's right. So to take us through the story, the adopted district plan had sites within it that met the need at that time, significant sites at Burgess Hill in particular. Those are all delivering and on the ground. Subsequent to that, only 4 years ago, we adopted our site allocations DPD. And the purpose of the site's DPD at that time was to meet the residual housing land, but we took, identified in the district plan, but we took the opportunity to update the economic growth assessment at that time, and it identified a need for what was at that time B1, B2 and B8 employment generating uses. We did that work, we allocated a range of sites in the site's DPD. So we've got quite a healthy supply sitting there already allocated. Before submission, we asked our consultants to update the economic growth assessment again. And at that time, that reflects the figures that are sitting in the supporting text to the policy and the plan. It's DPE 3. And at that time, because of what we had already committed through the site's DPD and the growth figures suggested in the updated EGA, there wasn't a requirement for us to allocate any further land because we'd essentially got enough in the pot. And then, just very recently, at the resumption of this examination, we went back to our economic growth assessment consultants and just asked them, because obviously with employment, the need figures are more variable over time, dependent on the market, etc. We asked them would it be sensible to have another look at that, given the amount of time that had passed since submission. They've had another look. The figures are presented in our topic paper, and essentially it still means, although some of the need for certain uses has increased, we've still got enough sitting on our commitments pot to meet it. In addition to this, so that's in terms of allocations. In addition to that, we have got the significant sites, as you say, sir, the very large sites in the plan, which are going to be delivering employment type uses on those sites. We're not counting those figures against the figures that we've got sitting in the need column. They are additional, as it were, because we can't at this moment in time pin down the amount or the quantum, the type, but they are there. And also we have our allowable policy, which is on existing employment sites. We would allow for intensification, regeneration, and for expansions to those. So we've got what I would describe as allocations to provide us a certainty in terms of the need, and then other policies which are allowable in increasing that over time if we needed to.
Perhaps I'll just ask Mr. Marsh just to complete that story slightly, and Endurance will tell you if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, they're not especially concerned about B1, B2. The main thrust of the concern they've raised is logistics. And so perhaps, Mr. Marsh, you could leave aside what we used to call B1, E1G. Leave that aside, but concentrate on what we are told at the moment about the need for logistics and the extent to which there is provision for that in the plan. And I know we need to separate need from supply slightly, but in terms of what the plan is proposing, there's obviously a relationship between what the plan proposes and what was available for it to select from at the time. Can you just help us with what was available in terms of sites? Had it been thought that there was a need for additional logistics? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So just referring to the new, the updated economic growth assessment figures. So that's on page 9, table 2.7, and the reference for you is ED7. So what Litchfields have done is looked at 3 different scenarios. They've ruled out scenario 2 as not being realistic. That's based on past rates rather than future. And so we're left with scenario 1, which is based on labour demand, which for B8 uses is 6.5 hectares over the plan period. And for labour supply, scenario is 10.9 to 12.9. So ideally, we've got a range of somewhere between 6.5 and 12.9.
Sorry, can you just reel back slightly?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. They ruled out scenario 2, which was past development rates. Yeah.
Correct, yes.
And now you're talking about scenario 1, presumably, are you?
Yes, so scenario 1, they come to the conclusion at the end that for planning purposes, we should be looking at scenario 1 or scenario 2. Scenario 1, scenario 3,
Yeah.
apologies. So scenario 1 based on labour demand for B8 gives us a total need requirement of 6.5 hectares over the plan period. And if you were to compare that with the labour supply scenario 3, that would give us a need of between 10.9 and 12.9. The figure that we've got in the submitted version of the plan, just by comparison, is 1.8 hectares, and that was based on scenario 3 labour supply. So it has increased since submission.
Yeah.
If you want a like-for-like comparison.
Yeah.
Sitting in our commitments list, we've got 3 sites in the sites DPD that could accommodate B8 use, and that the 3 sites totaling that have not yet been completed. And the 3 sites there total 9.1 hectares. And looking at other commitments.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, yeah. So in the site allocations DPD, the sites that haven't yet been completed, 9.1 hectares. 9.1. Okay. Capable of B8 uses. And I would, just in terms of the location of those, they are at Burgess Hill, Peace Pottage, and at Bolney Grange, which is essentially just off the A23, just to the west of Burgess Hill. So they're all in locations that the NPPF would support from a strategic logistics distribution perspective. So it's 9.1. And in terms of other commitments, so planning permissions, the county monitoring suggests that there is 0.94 hectares for B8 uses. So we arrive in total at our commitments for B8 of just over 10 hectares, which sits certainly in the range between scenario 1 and scenario 3. And that's before we talk about our permissive policies, what you might get from our strategic sites.
Thank you.
And just to finish that off, Mr. Marshall, I know the inspector
doesn't want to talk about omission sites, and it's right that Indurent did put forward a site, which was, if we needed to, we could go into the reasons why that was rejected. But aside from that site, has anybody put forward another site which for B8 use? Or was there anything else that could have been put in instead?
No.
No. So if there is a need in future, you've got the enabling policy.
Correct.
And that's where you would look to in order to meet that need.
Correct.
Thank you. Right, now I'll turn to Indira. Do you want to come back on those points?
Yes, sir, thanks, and thanks for the helpful explanation. Right to focus on that our primary interest is in industrial and logistics. There probably are a few points that it might be helpful, subject to your view on this, for me to pause and kind of ask if you think there's a point to ask the council back Otherwise, I could end up going through quite a lot of things all at once.
If there are points of clarification that
Yep,
you want from them,
that's-
that would be very helpful.
Yeah, okay. I think one thing I would observe, just by way of process, if you like, obviously the information came through fairly late in the process. So subject to your view, sir, it may be helpful, it was very helpful to be explained then, to have a table that simply shares lot comparison with the 2022 and the 2026 two studies and the comparative need for different typologies of employment space, because I think it was probably brushed over a little bit there, but there is quite a big difference. 1.8 hectares in the draft plan, suggested as needed for B8 versus up to, excluding scenario 2, 12.9 hectares. And I don't think anywhere in ED7, which is the latest EJ update, it suggests it would be not at the upper end of that range. So that would be one observation. I think that would be helpful. I think if I may, and come back on, I have concerns around the way that the supply that's available has been presented there, but I'll focus first on the need. In breaking that down, one of the features you'll have observed is there are 3 scenarios run through. So there's the employment scenario 1, which is predicated on updated employment forecasts. And I'm sure you've read this, sir, but it's in our hearing statement because we have access to the same forecasts. The latest forecasts suggest a much stronger level of job growth, almost double, so over 10,000 jobs, compared to just over 5,000 in the previous one. So that's quite a material change in economic fortunes of the borough, of the authority. Scenario 2 is based on past take-up, and again, when I look at the 2 figures, comparing one with the other, that's gone up quite significantly from 22.9 hectares to 38.4 hectares. Now, putting to one side that they want to dismiss that scenario, the reason for that, which is quite clearly outlined in EGA, in the Economic Growth Assessment Update, Needs Assessment Update, that take-up has been strong over the last couple of years. If you're looking for a reference for that, there's certainly in our hearing statement, we highlight, I think, that take-up has been certainly much stronger in the last couple of years, and that's referenced in that document as well. So, and it goes on to say, paragraph 2.16, a significant quantum, this is in ED7, a significant quantum of light industrial, general industrial and distribution floor space totaling nearly 40,000 square metres net was delivered during the last 4 years, so just under 10,000 a year, largely attributable to 2 major distribution B8 developments completed in 2023, and it lists those. So there's a context there that clearly B8, but that the whole market as a whole has become much more positive in the last few years. So 2 scenarios that have gone up by close to 50% under each one. The one scenario that doesn't change very much is the labour supply scenario, which is scenario 3. That's the one that is preferred. That's the one that's suggested in the council's hearing statement to be referenced directly in the policy. Now that doesn't change very much because essentially the underpinning assumptions don't change very much because it's predicated on how would the labour supply change if we built 1,090 homes every year. So, and that hasn't really changed. All that's changed within that scenario really is the mix of jobs which are grafted on from the latest forecast in scenario 1, hence why you get a lot more B8 floor space. So it's a bit of a answering its own question, if you like. It's a bit circular in terms of the scenario selected doesn't recognise any of those changing market signals other than the profile of employment, which as it articulates, significantly changes the need from 1.8 hectares to nearly 13 hectares of B8 floor space. So that's an area we have some quite significant concerns on. I know I wasn't at earlier sessions, but I have colleagues of mine have been at sessions. I understand there was some discussion around whether the housing number may or may not change, and just to point out, if it did go higher, for balance, if that was the preferred scenario, that you'd expect that scenario to be rerun with a higher housing figure, because obviously you would have a larger workforce, which is how that scenario works in terms of saying how much employment floor space needs to be aligned with the workforce. So that nearly 13 hectares would go up, and as would the overall need from 30.1. So my concern there is that, yes, it's a bit of a masking market signals to say that the need has only increased by 3 hectares by adding 2 years to the plan period. So we've gone from 27.1 hectares to 30.1 hectares, and we've added 2 years to the plan period, and that is because we've just applied the same assumptions in that scenario to homes. We, as a secondary point, and you'll have read, I'll take our hearing statement as read, we have flagged that where scenario 2 is dismissed, we're unclear exactly for the rationale for that being dismissed, particularly in the context of more recent monitoring data, which seems to obviously be of greater relevance to that scenario, appearing to overcome previous issues, and that this policy is now seeking to mask or not try to break down the need by different typologies anyway. It wouldn't seem to be, if the concern was that the overall demand is misrepresented because it can't be broken down by B1, B2, B2, B8, EG, III, that would seem to go by the by if you're now just talking about a singular employment figure in that policy. We also have shared, both in this in our hearing statement and previously in the representations, highlighted there are other available data sets to be able to do the same take-up. PPG doesn't just say you have to look at monitoring, you can also look at let me just find a reference. Yeah, PPG reference 2A 027 201 90220 says analysis can be based on the past take of employment land and or property. And so if there was a concern around the monitoring information of take-up of land, it's completely valid, as we've done in ours, to look at CoStar data, which looks at the amount of leased floor space each year, and you can get a net figure from that in terms of looking at how much is leased versus how much has been really vacated. And when we look at that, again, it proves a very strong, much stronger scenario of need. We calculate it under a suppressed demand scenario, which uses that methodology, somewhere north of 80 hectares. So considerably higher. And that isn't unsurprising when you look at the recent trends in terms of much higher levels of employment land being both taken up and occupied. So again, we do have fundamental concerns that the need is underrepresented. Should it be taken that scenario 3 is the preferred scenario, A, that would need to be updated and would increase in context of any upward change to a housing number. And B, I really do think it's misrepresentative to suddenly decide to change the way the policy is presented and say there's no disaggregation of need by B1, B2, B8, EG, etc. And that becomes particularly relevant, and I can pause there if that'd be helpful before you go on to the supply position.
I think you should carry on, actually.
That's fine, if you're happy with that. That's, the only point I'd add on the need, separate to that then, in case if we are carrying on, I think you alluded to it, sir, earlier on in the process, that the world has moved on. I appreciate this is under MPPF 2023. We flagged in our hearing statement observations that even under, I think it's in our answer to question B, so paragraph 1.21 of our Matter 4 statement, that MPPF paragraph 83 recognises that planning policy should recognise and address the specific location requirements of different sectors, including for storage and distribution operations, variety of scales. Obviously, further iterations of national planning policy framework have reinforced the need to consider industrial and logistics specifically. Modern industrial strategy outlines and builds on previous governments' recognition of the glue, as it's described, in terms of the logistics plays in facilitating other parts of the modern economy, and the I8 sectors that are growth sectors to which this plan obviously strongly looks to draw, capture investment and demand from as well. So I wouldn't undersell the importance of logistics in that context. I would also say that the kind of signals were there in the 2022 study, ED2, where I'll refer you to our paragraphs rather than read them all through, but paragraphs 1.28 through 1.30 of our hearing statement, highlighting whether the study, the preceding study, the 2022 study, which obviously has more detail than the more recent partial update, highlights the pace of employment development has accelerated recently, driven in particular by industrial and storage and distribution sectors. It was highlighting that coming out of a post-COVID world, there was significant demand, and that has materialised. If I may then, if I proceed on to supply, the council's statement, and I think you highlighted this again, sir, that it focuses on the spatial location of that supply, which isn't unhelpful, I would agree. And paragraph 4.22 of the council's Matter 4 statement, it highlights the distribution of site allocations strategically located on the A23 strategic road network, and then with referencing to the motorway as well, and the Gatwick Diamond. I don't know if you want to indulge me, sir, but if you don't want to do it now, it's certainly helpful in your own time to go back to the plan, which is in the site allocations document, so it's BD2. The reference to site allocations DPD on page 12 is exceptionally helpful in terms of showing the location of those allocations, the employment allocations. They're helpfully highlighted in yellow and numbered. And if you turn that up and compare it with table 1 of the council's matter statement, which is the supply that was referenced by Mr. Marsh before, it's quite enlightening when you work your way down that corridor. At the north, obviously close to Copthorne, and outside there's SA4, which sits nearest the Gatwick and the motorway. 2.7 hectares identified as SA4 complete, and that's obviously been completed relatively recently. If you keep going down the corridor, you hit SA8, which is identified as one of the residual sites. That's only 1 hectare. So in terms of strategic distribution, you're on pretty small, small site for that context. You then, very close proximity to that is SA7, which again is complete. So that's 2.3 hectares, again, recently delivered. So you're now all the way down, travelling south to down the A23. You hit SA6. I guess you would say that in so many ways these are the order in which there's high demand for them. SA6, 2.4 hectares complete. So we've come all the way down the corridor. We've hit one hectare site, which potentially remains available. We then have to come down further into the A2300, where we hit SA5, which is the Bolney site, which is a large share of the land which is available for to meet the at least 13 hectares of B8 requirement under the council's own preferred scenario. That is 7 hectares and identified in table 1 as an outline application, which is not just for B8 uses, just to be clear. So I would suggest it would be misrepresentative to say that that can be directly balanced with that need for B8 use. I don't know exactly what proportion, maybe the council might be able to tell you in terms of the 7 hectares, how much of that is B8. But that is already, that's permissioned, and so you would, in the way of recent permissions, they seem to have been built out very quickly. You would expect that to be very rapidly unavailable for the supply. The only other 2 sites then of those allocations that are flagged as available and not completed are both in Burgess Hill itself, and they are SA2 and 3. SA2 is not classified as suitable for B8. SA3 is, again, a small, just over 1 hectare site. Take the point around a lack of other available sites other than obviously the one we're here for coming forward, but it is equally very true that there is a very small and diminishing supply of land that could meet what is evidenced by the council itself as an increasing and growing demand for sort of B8 uses. Council's table 1 put some big numbers in there, and their proposition is that now the policy will be simplified by just putting in the big overall supply number versus the need number. Now, I'm sure that won't have escaped your perspective that that is hugely influenced by the inclusion of SA9 for the first time. I would point out that's not been included in any of the preceding tables, for which is a 48.75 hectares. And again, it is, again, I'm not meaning to be critical here, but including this in that table is a bit disingenuous in many ways, because it is clearly a science and technology park. So it wasn't outlined to you that that was in any way going to meet the B8 uses. But also, when you go to the site allocations document itself, it's, again, the council may have a response, may be able to provide a response to this, but unlike the other employment allocations, which all are stressed as developable areas, it is a gross site area. So I'm not sure of the 48.75 hectares what is actually developable land for employment uses. It may be less, it may, it's quite likely to be less. But also, and just to leave no ambiguity of it, if you would, both the council's matter statement and the site allocations DPD is extremely clear that at page 30, proposals in use class B8 storage and distribution will not be supported. That's stressed in the policy there, because, and quite rightly, it's a science and technology park, and it's aimed at high value knowledge-based businesses. And that's restated in the council's hearing statement in response to question D of paragraph 4.33, which by definition science and technology is business support environment, encouraging and supports the start-up, incubation and development of innovation-led high growth knowledge-based businesses. In clarifying whether or not it should be included as well, the only other references I've given, I promise I'll stop there, is the council's employment topic paper, MSTP3, which at paragraph 3.11 confirms under the subheading Policy SA9 Science and Technology Park that this was not included as contributing towards the need figures identified during district plan, sites DPD and submission draft district plan preparation. It's only in the latest council's hearing statement that it's included. And paragraph 3.15 is quite clear why. It's being, that they have had separate studies which identify a significant need from knowledge-based industries in the area, quantum, that's directly for the quantum sector. Again, so in terms of take-up of that site, my reading of paragraphs 3.13 through 3.15 is again that they're expecting the developable area of that to be taken up relatively swiftly, and certainly not to meet the 30.1 hectares, even under their preferred scenario, which is the reasons outlined, I think is understating the need and will increase even where the housing figure is subsequently changed as well.
Right.
I will stop now, I promise.
You can stop there. What I'm interested in is what is required to make the plan, if you think that the plan isn't sound, what is required to make the plan sound. Leaving aside the allocation of your site, what else is required to make the plan sound, in your view?
It's quite hard to put aside, but in terms of the allocation of our site, but we stress at the end of our hearing statement that there is a need for additional employment land to address that obvious increased need for industrial and logistics space. The risk, obviously, is, as the assumption in the late ED7 suggests, that it is driven by paragraph 2.22, that distribution-based sectors based on the 1,090 homes, so the housing requirement as is in the draft plan, would be expected to deliver 540 to 630 jobs. Now, obviously, there is a risk that a proportion of those will not be facilitated within this area. I would also stress, as the modern industrial strategy does, that the logistics sector is particularly important for all of the growth sectors outlined, to which the Science and Technology Park in particular is aimed at accommodating. So there's a market-driven risk, there's a risk of investment and business, the attractiveness of the other aspirations, objectives of the plan be undermined by having insufficient land to accommodate. And I think, whether it's a victim of its own success or what you want to look at, it's clear that looking down the sites, as I say, as you go down the corridor, they have been taken up, built out recently. So there is a clear demand there. So without further land to facilitate that, there is a risk of constraining both that sector and other parts of the local economy.
Yes, all right. Let's go back to what I said then. So let's leave aside your site. What changes would you seek in the plan, which in your view would make it sound in this regard? You're saying, if you look at the A23 corridor, you took me all the way down and you said that site's complete, that site's complete, that site's too small, and so on. The thought behind that then is there isn't sufficient provision for this particular kind of development. So in terms of policy, is it just a site allocation you're talking about, or is there anything else within the plan that you would see?
Obviously, the most obvious is to allocate more land, and I appreciate the world has changed, as you said early on in this session, from when the plan was originally conceived and based on its evidence. The evidence has, we've gone from a position where, whilst the evidence was prepared during COVID, there wasn't a significant need for this. There is a significant need now. So allocations is the obvious. The only other way would be a very flexible stroke, receptive policy that recognises there is a shortfall in land and views planning applications in a positive light in that context as a recognised, as per the current MP.
That's quite difficult with the logistics though, because the scale of what you were talking about is, I've come across this in other examinations where one particular authority had over 1 million square metres to allocate, but they didn't allocate it, they just had a flexible policy. So you had this big elephant in the room.
Yeah. I think I know which authority, yeah.
Yes.
So, but I guess that, in the eyes of both current and possibly emerging MPPF, you will be very rapidly in a world where there is a proven unmet need, probably based on occupier interest, but also certainly on market signals evidence and the council's own evidence. It doesn't square in terms of even the preferred scenario, in terms of the need is higher than any of the land which is available when boiled down. So there is an unmet need.
Yeah. Okay.
So you know, the plan could recognise that as a limitation, and like I say, there would need to be I'm struggling for the word here, but a permissive approach in policy to judging applications on sites, obviously with the tests of suitability through the wider planning application process, that they would be viewed permissively and positively.
Yeah, all right, I'll leave it there. I'll put this, there's a number of points there. So let's go back to the council. Do you want to respond to those?
So if I start and Mr. Marsh can chip in. So I think there's an initial question where you've heard the arguments on both sides of the room as to whether what is in the plan at the moment is enough. We say it's in the bracket of what's been identified. The suggestion on the other side is that even on the scenarios we're looking at, there's not enough. And if you look at scenario 2, it's certainly not enough. I think we're not going to help you with that you're going to have to take a view on that issue and let us know what you think. If at the end of that process your thinking is that we do need more sites, there are only 2 things that the plan could conceivably do. One of them would be to allocate sites. The other is to have a policy framework which recognises that there's a need which isn't allocated for. In an ideal world, the plan would be allocating rather than having a permissive policy, and you won't hear us say otherwise. The difficulty is we can't allocate what's not on the table. And I know there is one site on the table, but I think even allowing for a need, our response to that would still be actually there are good reasons why that site was not allocated first time around. It's a matter for you, sir, whether you would want to go into that discussion if you get to that point. But in a wider sense, if nobody is putting forward a site, well, we can't allocate something unless there is clear evidence it's going to come forward. That would be unsound in its own right. And so of necessity, we would be into the world where we're looking at a policy of the kind that we have at the moment, but possibly a variation of it, or possibly a policy like that, but with some supporting text behind it, which indicated at least broadly the scale of the need that you thought that policy should be seeking to meet, and if and to the extent that there were any particular locational criteria that went with it, roughly where within the district you felt that needed to be met. And that would then at least guide us in the application of the policy. And I think, sir, if you felt that there was a need for additional land, we're not going to push against a clarification of the policy that would help us when somebody comes forward with a site. But the upfront question is, are we there or thereabouts at the moment, or do you share Indurent's concern that there is an unmet need coming down the road, and the plan needs to tell us how we're going to deal with that? But I think at the moment, our view is that if you are of that view, then the result will be some form of rewording of the policy or the text that goes around it, just to help us guide it.
Yes, thank you. From what I've read and what I've heard today, it's as much a qualitative issue as a quantitative issue, in the sense that you're looking at a particular sector and looking at what sites you've got that might meet the needs or the potential needs of that sector, bearing in mind what's being said in national policy about the importance of logistics as part of a modern economy. So I think that the plan does need to look very seriously at that. In terms of framing let's go back one stage. Whether or not you allocate sites That's up to you. You do the site evaluation. That's your business, you know. I can look at the rigours around which the approach you've taken and so on, but it's your plan. So I'm not going to say you need to allocate X, Y, Z sites. I'm not in that position. But what you do need to do is to make sure that the plan is on all fours with national policy and, you know, basically is looking forward in terms of how it can support a modern economy. And logistics is part of that. So equally, I'm wary of the idea of a flexible policy that allows substantial amounts of very visible development of that sort. So you know, you would have to be very careful in how you organised and develop the wording around that policy.
So I think that's why I float the idea that what might be more useful would be background with supporting text, which at least indicated the considerations or some of the considerations that would go into the weighing process in that policy. But I don't know whether that would help. But I mean, for example, if you were of a view that there was a need of a particular level, quantum-wise, or a locational one, then obviously if we got an application for massively more or massively less in a completely different part of the district, it wouldn't preclude granting permission for that, but it would go into the balancing of any harm that was caused against the benefits. And if you have an application which falls into the categories that's been identified, it doesn't mean you grant it, but it does mean that you recognise the weight that is given to meeting that need. Mr. Marsh.
Yeah, just to add to that, it might be helpful. I know we've had a couple of discussions about national decision-making policies already in the weight and whether they will turn out to be what's proposed. But I just refer you to E2 and E3. So E2 is telling us that in decision-making, substantial weight should be given to the implementation of the industrial strategy, supporting improvements in freight and logistics. So that provides a permissive approach and tells us how much weight we should put on that if a proposal comes in. And E3B is helpful, I think, in the discussion we just had, because it says for logistics should be cited and designed to limit environmental impacts, sensitive building design, landscaping, impact on residents, take into account proposed mitigation. So that's sort of doing some of the things we've just been talking about.
Yes, it does, and it's possible you'd want to add a spatial dimension to that as well. Yeah. I'll just come back to you. Do you have any observations on that?
The observation I get is it's important, I think, sir, that the plan recognises, again, subject to the point made, that if you came to the conclusion that the supply available did not match the need, that is recognised to avoid unnecessary evidence stroke debate in an application of a policy. I think the point made around if there was a scaling to that, that's not a bad suggestion in many ways as a point in time where obviously potentially would be overtaken by national policy changes. But
yeah,
like I say, I think the original wording of the policy included a table which balanced out supply and demand of different different needs. We're now proposing a modification which backtracks from that. There should be some recognition in the policy that there are gaps, deficiencies, if you like, in where need remains unmet because of the available land.
Yes. So I haven't, just looking at the wider picture for the moment, and the general need for business industrial land, I haven't seen a sort of welter of representations that have said the council have got that wrong, the quantums are wrong as an overall picture. But there is credibility to what is being said here in terms of the particular sector and the spatial dimension to that sector. I do think that. So what I would say is, can you please have a look at the wording of that flexible policy? You know, you can make it as, you know, the wording, a lot of the wording is there for you in E3. There's probably a spatial dimension to it as well. I'm happy for you to get together and cooperate on the wording of that, if that would work.
Well, certainly.
But I know they've got a vested interest in a particular site.
Well,
Yeah.
so I think I can say now that while we're open to discussions about wording of policy, of the policy itself, in terms of are we going to allocate their site, the answer to that question is not going to change, even if
I think you made that point.
there is an increased supply. But if we just park that issue, certainly if there are particular views which Indurant wanted to pass over to us in terms of scale or location without promising to accept their text, we're very happy to look at that with a view to coming up with a form of wording, either in the policy or in the supporting text that goes with it. And it may be at the end of that there's something that everybody's happy with, or it just falls, you know, it goes some way towards meeting the concern, but we'll see what we get to.
Yes, you'll provide me with the wording, I'll have a look at it myself.
Absolutely, it's got to satisfy you ultimately, so yeah, that's quite right.
Okay.
Sorry, could I just raise one observation in that? In terms of the scale point, and I guess this is a decision for you, sir, in some ways, like I said, at the moment, and I'm happy to be corrected, but scenario 3 is predicated directly on linking to a housing number and the labour force that goes with it. Should that change?
Well, I think that's, yes, I meant to say that, actually, that's a point which I think goes without saying. I would expect you to do that iteration once we know what figures we're talking about.
Yeah, and we can begin that process in a ballpark sense already, sir, because you've given us a ballpark for what we should be aiming at. It might need fine tuning nearer the time, but it will certainly give a sense of how much additional land is going to be necessary. I think that's something we can do. Yes, we take that away, sir.
Right. Are we done with the general employment land requirement and the logistics issue? Because there's another thing I want to go on to.
I believe so. Thanks for allowing us to speak on that.
So the other point was the issue of flexibility, wasn't it, on existing employment, business, industrial sites. We've had an exchange, haven't we? So I flagged up to you national policy in respect of recycling of land, in effect, brownfield land and so on. I think you'd be reluctant, I mean, or you have suggested more flexible wording, I'll give you that, but you still want to maintain the protection policy. So what I want to find out is what is driving you to that particular conclusion. Is it the knowledge of your employment sites and their ability or lack of to, you know, convert to other things? Is it shortage of employment land? What is behind that sort of quite strong protection policy?
Yeah. Well, so I think if we start from national policy, whether one was looking at the NPPF as it is at the moment or even as it might be, as long as the protection of employment site, you can justify it and demonstrate that there is a need to keep them protected, there is plenty of support both in the old and the new NPPF for that. I mean, for example, even in relation to the presumption on development within walking distance of train stations, there's an exception to that for situations where you've got a plan that identifies designated sites for employment protection. So the principle of doing it is there in the NPPF, and it looks as if that will remain in future. The question is, can you demonstrate that it's needed? The policy itself, certainly in terms of the existing plan, the employment sites are shown, ringed, marked out on the proposals map. I think if one wanted to extend that to all employment sites which aren't ringed and identified, then one could understand there might be a concern that there wasn't an evidence base for that. But the employment sites to which the policy would apply are certainly capable of identification, and that's been done in the existing plan. And Mr. Marsh will be able to confirm this, but my understanding, sir, is that all of those sites are at the moment occupied and in employment use. In other words, this is not derelict or underused land. I understand that most of these aren't sort of just somebody's garage where they've got a bike repair shop. They may be relatively small units, but there is more than one occupier on most of them, and they are at the moment in active use. And in a district which is heavily rural, that's the fact that some of these are small sites is not surprising, but it is an important part of the rural economy. And so if you said, well, what is the justification for protecting them? It is the fact that at the moment they're occupied, there is an evident need for them, and if those occupiers were forced off to go somewhere else, then you'd need to find additional employment land somewhere else in a world where we are already seeking to find employment land. Mr. Marsh, do you want to add anything to that?
Only just to confirm that the sites that we did put a ring round at the site's DPD stage, as Mr. Brown said, they're not just small one unit. It doesn't encapsulate every single employment use. These were sites that were small industrial estates or business parks, or as Mr. Brown said, more than one unit. So a substantial supply of varying sizes across the whole of the district.
Right. So, yes, what I was concerned about in raising the subject in the first place is whether you had underused, underoccupied, outworn sites which weren't really fit for purpose, which could be repurposed for other uses, and the MPPF recognises the potential for residential in situations like that. In a district where you are constrained, where it would be good to be able to generate as much residential as possible. Would the policy as written make it more difficult to achieve that flexibility and generate those windfalls?
Just on a couple of points. So in terms of those that haven't been as successful or haven't been occupied, the only thing that we've seen from those is for them to be regenerated for more employment. So I can think of one example, particularly in Burgess Hill, where that's a recent application where the amount of employment floor space in terms of the units was increased on that site, because the principle of that was accepted in terms of SA 34. I think in terms of the sites that we put a ring round, they are a mix. So there are some which are significant town centre, not town centre, but within the built-up area of Burgess Hill and Haywards Heath, such as Victoria Business Park, which are a large industrial estate. That's contributing a significant amount of employment floor space, our current supply. Using that for anything other than employment would mean us needing to lift and shift employment sites from that site elsewhere, potentially on a greenfield site. So the question would then be, would we prefer more housing on the greenfield site or the employment? It's a choice then. And then there's others sitting in the list, and again, SA 34 at the site's DPD and the policies map and the individual maps that sit at the back. The remaining sites are largely rural, disconnected from current settlements. So whether they would be appropriate as a standalone development, a site of 1 or 2 hectares detached from the existing settlement in rural areas, whether they would be suitable for housing in terms of the approach that we're taking, which we'll talk you through next week, and the first stage of our site selection criteria. Anything that's significantly detached from settlement will be ruled out in MPPF sustainability terms.
Right.
So we don't think that there's a possibility that any of these should be appropriate for that use, and therefore protecting them for the employment use, which is helpful for us in keeping the supply, but also helpful for us in keeping the types of use for employment at certain rural areas is what we should be doing.
Okay. So in terms of the operation of the policy, because you've redrafted it anyway, of course, but in terms of the operation of the policy, is it clear that it specifically applies to the ones that are identified on the policies map, or is there ambiguity around that?
I think the policy in the sites DPD was clear that it was just the ones with the ring round.
Yeah.
I think in our correspondence about and modifications, I think we may be looking at removing that to bring in other employment sites. I think we should be only using this policy for the ones with the ring round, because that's what the sites DPD did.
We can make sure the wording
We can check.
I think that's right, because once you start introducing that kind of ambiguity in the plan, you just get trouble down the line, don't you? And, it's better to be clear.
And that's exactly why we put the ring round originally, because before that point we were having applications that were eating into what we would define as an employment area, but without the ring round it, you couldn't decide what was in, what was out. And so that was the purpose of specifying.
And I don't have the proposed amendment in front of me, sir, but I'm just looking at the submission draft of the plan where DP2 says existing employment sites, brackets, including those shown on the proposals map, are protected. Now, that would suggest that the policy was directed at going beyond simply ones that have been ring fenced. We need to check what the proposed amendment says, but based on what you've said and what Mr. Marsh has just said, I think we should make it clear that it only applies to those which are shown on the policies map. Ms. Salisbury,
I've got the wording in front of us. It's not as clear as it should be, sir, so we can propose some further modifications to make sure that the intent is better reflected.
I think that's right. It's got to be right, hasn't it?
I think, well, certainly in terms of explaining to you why it was justified to protect employment sites which we hadn't even identified, might be difficult.
All right, well, I think that's clear. I mean, otherwise the wording of the amendment, I think, is fine, but obviously if you can make it clear that it applies to specifically identified sites, then that's all right.
That's very helpful, sir. Thank you.
Good. I don't have any more points on matter 4. No.
No, just to clarify then, is the intent for us to send through some ideas to Mr. Marsh? Is that?
Yeah, should we just have a brief conversation once the inspectors close, and we can talk about who to contact, and we can sort that out.
All right. So that we're drawing to the end of this week's business, in fact. So we've covered a lot of ground. I know there's a lot of work for you to do, but
we're going in the right direction.
We are going in the right direction, so I'm very pleased about it. We come back next week to talk about the spatial strategy on Wednesday, and then on Thursday we're looking at the specifics of the site allocation process. We're not looking at, and I'm speaking to the room here because there'll be people who are watching the streaming, but we are not looking at the merits specifically of individual sites. We're looking at the process by which the council decided to allocate certain, it's the sites that are in the plan. Excuse me. So, so that's for Wednesday and Thursday, I think.
Do you have a view, sir, about whether we're likely to spill over into Friday or not?
No, I don't want to spill over into Friday.
Right, so, I mean, can we assume at the moment you'll not be sitting, or should we just keep it free just in case? I don't mind, it's just a matter of...
It helps you, doesn't it, if you know. I think we could do it in 2 days. I think let's leave the Friday out of it.
Okay.
And we'll sit on the Wednesday and Thursday. The session that... the way things have gone this week, I'm beginning to think that these sessions are not going to spill over, but you don't know when it comes to spatial strategy, you just don't know, do you? So we've got a land promoter session on the Wednesday morning, and then we've got a local group, local resident session in the afternoon. The one in the morning is the one that I think could, but I don't want it to, spill over. If it did, then it would spill over into Thursday morning, which is the site allocation session anyway. And it'll have the same people, I think. Almost certainly. So I'm fairly relaxed about it at the moment, but we'll try and do it within the time that is set in the timetable.
Thank you, sir. That's helpful. I'm sure if it needs to spill over, that can be accommodated, but we can at least begin making plans on the basis that it won't. That's helpful.
Jolly good. Right. Well, unless there is anything else, I'll close this hearing and we will start again next Wednesday. Thank you all very much. Thanks for your help.
Thank you, sir.